Well, it's a meat-eating world. South Africa is right up there with the rest. It's according to a global study that looked at meat consumption. Our growing love of animal flesh has seen us turn almost every public holiday into a braai day. Are we over-consuming meat? And what are the environmental impacts of consuming too much? My guests tonight, Lila Bruk, a dietitian at Lila Bruk and Associates, Alan Pick, owner of the Butcher Shop and Grill, as well as Vanessa Black, an advocacy and research coordinator for Biowatch South Africa, joining us from Durban. Good evening, all of you. Alan Pick, hi. How much are we eating? What are you seeing going through your restaurants?
Tons.
Tons.
Yeah.
Literally.
It's very much a South African tradition.
But how much would you sell in a day? Give us some figures.
About 2.5 to 3 tons a week.
Wow. That is quite extraordinary.
No, but it's a little bit perceived. It's not only the restaurant, we have a full-on butchery that's attached to it as well. So you'll have a meal, you enjoy the meal, then you'll buy the meat to take home.
Smart.
Yeah.
Are people eating more though?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they're eating it twice. They eat it and they're taking it home.
Yeah.
But we do a huge amount of the African market. And individuals that come in to buy meat specifically for, as you said, for brine.
Lila, so tons of meat are being eaten. How much is too much?
So that's a very good question. When it comes to the red meat in general, you don't want to have more than 500 grams a week or 70 grams a day.
What does that look like?
So if you think about 70 grams, it's approximately like a palm-sized portion, maybe slightly smaller even. But when it comes to processed meats, so your Viennas, bacon, that sort of thing, pastrami, that you shouldn't have more than, say, even 50 grams a day, because even 50 grams a day has been linked to an increased risk of colon cancer by about 18%. So definitely, I always think to cut out processed meat, but if it's regular red meat, not more than 70 grams a day.
So other than colon cancer, I mean, what's the physical impact? What are the areas that suffer the most?
So certainly, unfortunately, red meat's much more calorie dense, so certainly weight gain is a concern. High blood pressure, often, especially processed meats are high in sodium. There's also the concern of prostate cancer as well. So it affects really many areas and in many different ways. And obviously heart disease is a big one.
Vanessa, tell us about the environmental impact of eating as much meat as we do.
Well, there is a huge impact, and actually it's related to the way that we produce food in general. And the reason that eating meat has a big impact is that to get the meat that we consume, we feed animals a lot of grains and oil cake. So in a sense, we're expanding our agriculture, which is produced in an industrial way globally, to feed the meat industry and the poultry industry.
I mean,
and that has huge implications.
And what would you like to see? I mean, what is something that's easily fixable here, other than stopping eating meat?
Well, so it's about how we produce our food generally and changing our industrial agriculture to more ecological ways of farming, and of course also reducing meat, because you can't just keep expanding. And the part of the problem is that people around the world are consuming more meat and dairy products as global diets are changing. So we need to go back to more traditional diets that are suited to our local climates, our local soils, and local cultures. But we've become a globalized society, and the industrial food system feeds into that. So we're constantly bombarded with advertising telling us to consume these kinds of products, and often more processed products. And then we need more grain and more space, more land and more water to produce those grains and oil seeds to feed the animals that are produced in the industrial system. A lot of people in South Africa think that particularly cattle are grazing freely. So even though we have a huge part of our land used for grazing animals, a lot of those animals, when they're taken to slaughter, the last 3 months they are fed in feedlots to fatten them up, and those feedlots are supplied by grains that could be eaten by people. So it's a sort of ongoing cycle of negative impacts. And to produce those grains in an industrial system, you've got monoculture production, people are using fertilizer, they're using herbicides a lot. So increasingly we're seeing genetically modified crops, particularly for maize. In South Africa, between 80 and 90% of our maize is grown using genetically modified seed and grown in conjunction with herbicides like glyphosate. So that's also got its own impacts. On the environment, glyphosate goes into our water system. It's very bad for water organisms, but we've also heard the the international court case around glyphosate, where Dwayne Johnson was awarded a massive payout, or he's supposed to get a big payout from Monsanto Corporation because they covered up the impacts of glyphosate and the problems with cancer that causes.
Okay, let me bring in Alan. I mean, you hear that. I'm sure you know all of that. I'm sure you've had campaigners shove that down your throat. What's your conversation with conservationists about meat and allaying their fears, if you can?
You can't.
No.
You know, the anti-market is the anti-market. They're not customers of ours. We've got people that come to enjoy a good meal, a good steak, prawns, chicken, and they really don't give a damn about what anybody else says about what's happening to the environment. They're interested in the meal, good bottle of wine, and a good steak on their plate. It's pretty much myopic.
You don't want to spoil your meal, but you would like to think that you are thinking about the impact, possibly, and what you can do to minimize it.
Whatever I do, it's going to have absolutely no effect on the bigger picture.
But okay, the sort of meat that you source, how do you make sure that you are doing it from a... Okay, clearly you're not interested in the environmental impact, but sourcing good meat
we deal with
that's not polluted.
The biggest feedlots in the country that have got parameters that they have to subscribe to in order to, as your lady was saying now, to slaughter the animals and everything. It's not for the faint-hearted. I agree with you. I take a lot of people. We have a lot of guests from overseas, and we take them out. And it's strange for people to see this, you know. But unfortunately, that's reality. That's economic reality. The market dictates to you that there's a huge percentage of carnivores that want meat. And that's what we do.
Okay, let's take a quick look at how much meat we eat every year. I mean, you were telling us tons, and that's just from your restaurant. Poultry, 38.7 kg, beef and veal, 11.9, pork, 4.1, lamb, 3.6. So, Lila, I mean, a lot of meat is being eaten. Chicken, obviously, is fashionable, easy to get, the cheapest of the lot.
Definitely.
Right? What about plant-based diets? How does that fit into the scenario?
So it gets a bit complicated because your main concern or your main lacking factor, if one can put it that way, is protein. So definitely if someone is vegetarian but mainly vegan, they will have to pay more attention to the type of protein they have, how much combining certain proteins with grains helps to create a better quality protein. For example, baked beans on toasts, lentils and rice, etc. But certainly, if it's done correctly, it can be as healthy as a carnivorous diet.
Just a lot more work.
Yes, potentially.
You hear a lot about the younger generation, though, moving away from meat. Is that having an impact? Are you seeing that?
Definitely. It's definitely become much more trendy, and I think the face of veganism has changed, whereas even 10 years ago, it used to be something that was very niche. It's become much more mainstream. I mean, you can see from all the vegan restaurants that are popping up, vegan options on menus, so certainly it's definitely more popular than it was.
The attraction of the meat substitutes.
Exactly.
Which never sounds very attractive, does it? Vanessa, is one of the problems around the world the growing middle class, you know, in South Africa, in China, for example, where it's fashionable to eat meat? It shows that you've done well.
Yeah, that is a growing trend, but that's not the only issue. It's also this issue of the way we've been conditioned to think about our diets. And I've heard people say, our guests say that We're carnivores, we're not carnivores, we're omnivores. And the problem globally is that we're eating simplified diets that are more processed. So we're eating more carbohydrate and energy-rich and oil-rich diets instead of the diversity that we used to eat. And we're seeing a growing increase then in diabetes and heart disease and those lifestyle diseases. So in addition to environmental concerns, there's also our own health concerns in terms of becoming changing our food system. And we're advocating for an agroecological system where you're not necessarily abandoning animals, because you do need animals in the production system, but it's a completely different way of producing, where you, instead of producing huge monocultures to get these very simplified diets and to feed animals, you're producing in a polyculture where you've got a great diversity of plants and where the animals fit in, so that it doesn't have that impact on the environment.
Okay, well, I think it's going to take a long time before anything changes. Thank you all for speaking to us. Vanessa Black, Alan Peck and Lila Bruk. That's our show for tonight. News is next.